Hello everybody, my name is Dan and welcome to another Q&A where you guys ask me animation questions and I try my best to answer them. So judging from the response from my last Q&A episode, you guys enjoy this and would like more of them, so I'm gonna try to come out with another one of these every now and then. You guys also gave me a plethora of questions to try to answer, over 200 of them actually, and I definitely won't be getting to all of them because it's too many. But I will answer as many as I'm able to right now, so let's just go into it. And the video you see on screen today is just a bunch of Monster Hunter footage I recorded for the most recently released animation analysis videos, which you can watch here if you have not seen them yet. But yeah, anyway, let's get on with the questions. How often do you find yourself using physics and math in your animation work? Math, not very often, because most of the math goes on under the hood with the animation tools I use. Fortunately, I'm just able to focus on the craft and not really the numbers. Physics? I mean, I guess I have to have an understanding of physics in order to replicate them in animation, but other than that, I don't have to do, like, a lot of the math side of physics, if that makes sense. I don't have to use, like, formulas or equations or anything. What single 5 to 10 second clip that you have worked on are you most proud of? Unfortunately, the clip that I worked on that I'm most proud of was never released, and to my knowledge will never be, because it's just part of a project that got canceled, which is sad, but yeah, I think that unfortunately some of my best work was in that particular project. Unfortunate, but that's just kind of how it goes in this business sometimes. Basically, it involved an octopus playing a drum solo. That was a lot of fun. What do you think is the reason for Disney no longer making 2D animated films? It's really just a matter of earning power, unfortunately. Like, Disney Animation's had a long history of peaks and valleys when it comes to earnings and profitability of their animated films. And unfortunately, after the Renaissance in the 90s, after Lion King basically, Disney Animation had a pretty steady trend downward in terms of the money they were bringing in. Especially when you look at some of the real box office bombs like Atlantis and Treasure Planet. That one was bad. They lost a lot of money. Especially considering that around that same time, Pixar and then DreamWorks and then Blue Sky and then a bunch of other 3D studios were popping up and just making bank with their films. It really did look at the time like audiences just weren't as interested in 2D films anymore. And I think that's because a lot of Disney's 2D output wasn't quite as strong at that time, but still. And Disney did attempt to bring 2D back with Princess and the Frog and then Winnie the Pooh, both of which are awesome, by the way. If you haven't seen those two movies, they're great. I highly recommend watching them, but they did not make nearly enough money to justify the continued existence of 2D animated features at Disney, which is really tragic because I love those movies. I grew up on those things. I think most 3D animators in the industry would love to see 2D animation come back. But Disney is doing really well with their 3D animated features right now. They're kind of on a hot streak right now, honestly. And besides that, I think there's a lot less high caliber 2D animation talent floating around, at least compared to the number of high quality 3D animators there are. I think Disney just doesn't have a lot of financial incentive to do that right now, which is sad, and I hope they eventually change their mind because I would love to see traditional 2D hand-drawn Disney animation come back someday. What is a good way to practice animation? Like making shorts or exercises or a lot of pencil tests? Yeah, actually all of those are good ways to practice animation. It can depend on what specifically you're wanting to practice. Like if you're just trying to learn the basics, then doing lots of little basic tests like bouncing balls or little simple walk cycles or other stuff. No matter what level of animator you're at or what you're trying to get better at, just come up with an exercise that would be good practice for that specific thing. Whether that's as complex as a dialogue scene between two characters, or just a simple bouncing ball, or a sack of flour walking around, or just some other simple thing. Whatever specific aspect of animation you're wanting to practice, just do some exercises. Just make animation, make stuff. This is one of those things where you just get better with more practice and more experience. When you mention animating at X frame rates, you said you often work with what your game is targeting. I only have experience with Source Filmmaker, which primarily uses time measurements, seconds and milliseconds, instead of frame measurements. Really? I did not know that. I have not messed with SFM. Is this the same concept as exporting an animation to any frame rate? I guess technically yes. And in a way, I suppose this is a more accurate way of working, like it's a more practical way of working. like seconds and milliseconds are a static unit of measurement that you can always use no matter what frame rate the game is playing at. So I think it would make a certain degree of sense to be working with seconds and milliseconds. I think the thing is, though, that most animators in any side of the animation industry have been working with frames forever, and that's just what everybody is used to at this point. So I think it would be pretty hard to convince a lot of people to switch over, especially when we've got several workarounds that make this manageable. But yeah, that's really interesting. What would you say is the more enjoyable part of animating? As in, what is fun about it? Partly it's just the fun of creating stuff. Like, I think most any creative craft has the inherent fun of making a thing. But for animators, I think a big part of the reward is seeing the finished product, like seeing a character brought to life, doing something that you told them to do and looking awesome or cute or cool or just whatever you're going for. It's really rewarding seeing that final result. As a freshman in high school, I would like to know what subjects I get a substantial background in if I want to go into animation. Any advice? If you don't have an animation program in your school, and that's fine, I don't imagine very many of them do, there's not really a whole lot of classes you can take right now that are going to prepare you. If anything, maybe try to take an art class or an acting class. If you've got like a drama program at your school, that'd be a good thing to look into as well. And just start kind of doing a little bit of research on how animation works on your own, because if it's something that you'd like to do, then you may not be able to study much in high school, but at the college level, you'll have a lot more options available to you. How does an animation team get consistent animation? Good question. This does take a bit of work, because every project does need to have a consistent looking style, despite the fact that there are a lot of different animators with their own strengths and styles working on the project. Generally, as an animator, you need to be able to adapt to work with whatever animation style you're having to work with. And the animation supervisors and directors on the team are responsible for making sure that everybody's work is conforming to that on-model standard. Like if someone animates a character for a game or for a movie, and for whatever reason the animation they've done doesn't feel right, it doesn't feel true to the character, or it doesn't feel like it fits the style of the game or movie, then the supervisors or superiors should be able to call that out and tell the animator to try to bring it more in line with what the project requires. And that can definitely be challenging to do, but it's just kind of part of the job. Why do action games like Bayonetta and fighting games feel so responsive when an attack hits, yet games like Elder Scrolls and MMOs, even MMOs that consider themselves action MMOs, feel like you're just kind of waving your sword in the air? This can be from a lot of different factors. Part of it is just that Bayonetta and fighting games tend to have very fast animations. They're very quick and snappy, and they are tuned specifically to be readable even at that speed. And for games like Bayonetta and most fighting games, that kind of animation is really important, and it's really important that it be readable, and a lot of emphasis is put on that. Whereas for Elder Scrolls, I mean, half the time you're in first person, so you're not even going to be seeing your character's animation much, you're just going to see a sword wave through the air. And for MMOs, maybe it's not quite as much of a priority. Any tips or resources for those of us who struggle to make good performances for reference videos? I always feel like my acting's terrible, and in turn it gives me a hard time animating. Yeah, that is a bit of a challenge. Not all animators are good actors. Even though we do analyze acting regularly, that doesn't necessarily make you a good actor when you're trying to act in front of a camera yourself. There are a few things you could try. First, you could try to act out the scene a bunch of different times, like do a bunch of takes, and then find the one take that you like most, or find the different bits from different takes that you liked most and kind of stitch them together and start building out your blocking from there. You could also try to maybe just not start with reference. Instead, maybe like thumbnail out the scene, like visualize the kind of performance you'd want that character to give, and then later maybe shoot yourself performing it just so you can see the physicality of how that performance works and kind of feel the physicality for yourself as you act it out, just to kind of be a supplemental tool. And a third option, which may be a little weird and may not work out for you, but who knows, if you know somebody who is a decent actor, you could try to bring them in and direct them. That's actually something a lot of Disney animators did. They would bring in professional actors and direct them to act on camera, and then the animators would use that as their reference. For films like Little Mermaid, you can see footage of animators like Glenn Keane directing an actress who is playing the part of Ariel, and he's telling her what he needs from the shot and what sort of performance he's wanting from her, he's basically just being a director. and then she acts it out, and maybe they'll do several takes, and then he'll take that and use that as reference, which has the added benefit of an actual actor is giving that performance and can come up with something that may surprise the animator that they may not have even thought about if they were just animating it on their own. I don't know, it's not something I've really had the opportunity to do myself, but if you happen to know a decent actor, that could be an interesting thing to try. It has given pretty good results historically. What are some of the most unique challenges that come up in 3D animation as opposed to other forms? Well, this may not be entirely unique to 3D. I guess stop motion would probably deal with this as well, but because we're dealing with a virtual model that is rigged up with bones, and we are limited to moving it in ways that that rig inside the model allows, it can sometimes be difficult for us to animate a character with the flexibility that a 2D drawing would have. Like if a 2D animator wants a character to hit this super wacky deformed pose for a few frames, they can just draw it that way and bam, they're done, they did it. But for 3D animators, we're kind of limited by what the rig allows us to do, and rigging a character up to be able to replicate that kind of crazy posing can be really complicated and require someone who really knows how to rig well. Could you show us some of your work? I would love to see it. Actually, I do have an animation reel of a bunch of my work that I did at Pixar Canada up on the internet. So yes, I will link to that animation reel below. How important is it for a 3D animator to know 3D modeling and/or rigging? I would say it's important for any 3D animator to at least have a passing familiarity with the basics of just how it works, if for no other reason than so you can actually communicate with modelers and riggers and effectively work together. I am not very good at 3D modeling or rigging. I am actually pretty terrible at both of them, and I've not done much of either one since I was in school. I have a pretty narrow specialization when it comes to what I am good at in terms of 3D, which, because I tend to work in larger teams, is good, because specialists thrive in larger teams. Big AAA teams tend to be made of lots of people who are really good at specific things. However, if you're working at an indie studio, there usually aren't as many people working on the same project, which means those people need to wear a lot of different hats. And in that case, having a wider variety of skills will actually be very useful. So the question of whether or not you need to know modeling and rigging and other complementary skills really depends on where you're wanting to work. Do you know any software that you would recommend to draw over videos frame by frame? I've not done a lot of this myself. I used Flash when I was doing some rotoscoped animations in school. There is probably a better tool for this somewhere, and I'm willing to bet there is someone watching this who could tell you in the comments and give you a better recommendation than I could. So if you're watching this and you know the answer, please share this information in the comments. What are some of your favorite 3D animation movies from an animator's perspective? Meaning a movie you really like because of its acting or smooth animation or whatnot. Well, I would definitely recommend any Pixar film for just acting quality. I would also recommend most Disney feature films, especially around the Renaissance era. There was a lot of great work happening there. I would also recommend some Hayao Miyazaki films, because the animation in them is great, and there's a lot of really well-observed performances in there. I've been planning on doing 3D animation of a story I'm writing. How hard is it to create a model from scratch? Okay, so 3D animation is complicated, and it involves a lot of different skill sets, from modeling to texturing to animating to... There's a lot, and there are not a lot of people who are really good at all of those different skills. If you do not have much familiarity with them at all, I would recommend either getting help or strongly considering whether you want to invest the time required to make a 3D animation of this story yourself. Like, not to be discouraging, like if you've got the will, go for it. Absolutely. Other people have pulled it off. I just want to definitely stress that if CG 3D animation is something that you've only kind of got a passing familiarity with and don't really know much about yet, you are diving into a very deep pool here. And just know what you're getting into. You're jumping into a very complicated realm. It's doable, but you may find it to be quite hard. How do you properly study reference? I keep trying to, but I just can't seem to be able to understand the subtle changes in the movement that give a character personality or mood. Part of this comes from practice, just watching a lot of stuff and kind of developing your analytical eye for performance and movement and animation and stuff. Sometimes it can help to just specifically focus on the details you need for that particular shot. Like if there's something about the physicality of a movement that you're trying to figure out, or something about the emotion or acting that you're trying to pull out. Like, part of this just comes down to getting practice and developing your analytical eye, but it can also help to maybe try to focus specifically on what you're trying to get from this reference. Like, if you're just trying to pick out the body language, just focus on that and don't worry about the facial expressions so much. If there's something about the emotions or the expressions that you're trying to capture, then really focus on that and watch for noticeable changes in expression and try to single out the specific moments when you're watching that really make you feel something, and then go in frame by frame, just watch it over and over until you can pick out what that specific thing is. But like I said, a lot of this just kind of comes down to practice and experience. It tends to get easier over time. How did you get into animation? In college, I started out as an art major and kind of stumbled my way into the CG digital 3D animation department they had there, and found out that I liked it, and then just kind of kept on studying from there. Really, like, as soon as I found that department and realized that animation was actually an option for a career for me, that pretty much settled the matter, and then it was just an issue of continuing to figure out what specific part of CG digital animation stuff I wanted to do, which turned out to be animating. And then after school, I applied for a bunch of jobs, somehow got one, and now here I am. What movies and/or games have you worked on that you are able to talk about? Let's see, I have worked on several Pixar shorts in the Cars and Toy Story universes, and I also did a bunch of animation for a game called Moonrise, which unfortunately it was canceled, but there is a lot of footage on the internet of it, so you can kind of see a bunch of the animation it contained if you'd like to. It was a lot of fun, lots of fun little creature animations to do. When animating a character talking and emoting using bones, in what order is better doing this? Starting by the lip sync and then the emotion and then the body movements, or the other way around? I would say the other way around. Usually I find it's best to save lip sync until the end. Lip sync is pretty intricate and detailed, and it's not necessarily the most important part of the animation, if that makes sense. Like, a lot of the time, people aren't necessarily looking super closely at the lips and mouth. I mean, they'll notice if it looks wrong, but it's not the most important thing when it comes to the acting. Usually you want to figure out the physical performance and the basic facial expressions. Like, you want to block all that stuff in first and make sure that's working. And then after all that's done, then you can layer in details and lip sync and intricate finger motions and other little polishy things. Hi, I'm in college working on my computer science degree, where I will soon hope to work on video games and programming. I was wondering how much programming knowledge, if any, is required to use in animation. Fortunately for me, not much at all is required. I am terrible at programming, I don't know anything. However, if you do know programming, especially if you're working in 3D animation, then you're going to have a bit of a leg up, because you can create scripts for yourself, or potentially little tools for yourself to make your job easier. The more programming technical knowledge you have, the more versatile your skill set and range of abilities, and the more you might be able to help yourself rather than going to a tech artist and begging them for help. So, if you are a good animator who also has a bit of technical knowledge, you could be a very valuable employee. How difficult is it to match animation decisions with the theme and the art style of a video game? It can be a little challenging. There's usually a learning curve that happens early on in a project as all of the artists and animators kind of adapt and feel out and become comfortable with the style of that particular game or film or whatever they're working on. And it's also up to the supervisors and the directors to make sure that everybody's work is remaining mostly on model and consistent. How do you do background animation? For example, if you need to change the time of day or animate a seascape, or even how water falls and bounces off objects when it's raining. Well, it kind of depends. A lot of the time, the background animation may not be done by the animators on the team. It may be that if the background animation has to do with the environment, it may be created by the environment artists or the tech artists working with them. Or it might be done by effects artists, like if we're talking about film, where they could simulate liquid rain falling and bouncing off stuff and just all the liquid physics involved in that. The animators may get involved if they are needed, but a lot of the times the environment artists and effects artists can get that job done themselves. Also, can I ask another question? How does one do combat animation, like in Dark Souls, where timing and the feel of the weapons is very important? Really, you just figure out what you're going for, you start building it, and then you start iterating. And I imagine they did a lot of iteration on the animation in Dark Souls to just get the timing and the feel of things feeling good and right. It tends to take a while to really get that polished to where it's really working and feeling good. What is the most complicated object or scene that you've ever had to animate, and why? In some ways, I would say that the aforementioned octopus drum solo was probably the most complicated thing I had to figure out. But of the things that were actually released, I would say this one shot where Rex knocks down a bunch of Toy Story characters, and they all kind of tumble into each other and fall like bowling pins and all that. So that took me a while. Probably longer than it should have, but it was kind of complicated making it look right. Isn't it true that 24 FPS is the most natural rather than 60? Okay. So like in a literal sense, is 24 frames per second more natural than 60? No. Higher frame rates are going to look more like reality to our eyes, so technically higher frame rates will look more natural. Now, that's not always to say that they will look better, but they will look more natural. Like, if any of you guys saw the Hobbit films at the high frame rate, like 48 frames per second, I think is what they ran at. It takes a little bit of getting used to because they look very real, too real sometimes. It feels kind of weird. But if we're not talking about things looking natural in like a literal sense, and we're talking about things looking right to our eyes, I think there are a lot of cases where 24 frames per second is something that a lot of us have gotten very used to in watching films for a long time. And 24 frames per second combined with motion blur and all the things that make film look like film has a distinct look that all of us are very used to. And if it is your goal to make something look and feel like a film, then replicating that sort of abstracted look of film's 24 frames per second is a part of that. And I mean, we can debate endlessly over whether that is a better choice than having one's game run at 60 frames per second, but there is, at the very least, definitely a difference in the look and feel. What should a new animator do to practice animation, like walk cycles and bouncing balls? Yeah, both of those. I would say start out doing really simple things like bouncing balls that have different weights, simple walk cycles, but do a variety of walk cycles, all kinds of walks, different kinds of personalities, like do some skips, do slow, sad walk cycles, excited, happy walk cycles, do all kinds of stuff like that. Then kind of escalate, do more complex physical actions, do like flips and martial arts and jumps and parkour, and just start coming up with other kinds of challenges for yourself. Characters lifting heavy things or carrying other characters or dancing. Oh gosh, dancing is really complicated sometimes. And then build from there, like start bringing more acting into it. Have a character give kind of like a monologue, or bring in two characters and have them act together, like acting out a little scene. Like just start building to more and more complex stuff. Are there any particular studios that you work at? Good question. Yes. Do you have any tricks for someone trying to go from CAD and mechanical animations to game animation? Just reference and practice, or is there some trick to keep in mind for a more fluid and organic final product? I think reference and practice is probably the best answer. Just study the kind of movement you're trying to replicate, really study body mechanics, and try to pinpoint the stuff that makes something feel fluid and organic. And just as a general rule for making something look more organic and less mechanical, arcs and slow in, slow out are the two principles that are going to be your best friends for pulling that off. Also overlap and follow through, I guess. Just study the 12 principles in general. Okay, this is going very long and I've barely made a dent in the number of questions I have. I think I'm going to call it for this particular episode, and in fact, maybe I will... You know what, I think I'm going to release 2 of these Q&A episodes in rapid succession since there are so many questions to try to get through. I will be back again very soon with a follow-up Q&A episode. Thank you guys very much for watching and for all your great questions. I'm sorry I'm not able to answer all of them, but thank you for sending them. If you have another question that you would like to ask, there's a link down in the description. Just throw it in the pile, but do recognize that I have got over 200 questions left already, so no promises, but feel free to add it to the pile. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I will be back soon with some more animation Q&A. See you then.